Hey guys, welcome to Young and Sober. I am your host, Sydney, and today I really wanted to get into a little bit of a deep dive into what has gotten me to this point, my own struggles with addiction and mental health. My sobriety date is May 22nd, 2025. Starting all the way from the very, very beginning, I am adopted, and my biological family unfortunately has a very messy and long history with addiction. It's kind of like pretty deep generational stuff. Growing up, I really believed that because I wasn't raised by them, I could just simply outrun it. I had this mindset of, yeah, they struggled, but I won't. I'll be smarter, I'll be more in control. I'm different. Which is, in my opinion, a very alcoholic way of thinking. But I had no idea addiction isn't just DNA. It's emotional wiring, it's coping patterns, it's trauma, it's behaviors, it's all the things I was already silently battling with without even realizing it. So instead of being immune to it, I spent years running straight into it without knowing that's where I was headed. I was an alcoholic like long before I even took a sip of alcohol. It's just been my way of thinking for a very long time. Growing up, I never really knew who I was. I was bullied a lot. And because of that, I got really good at learning how to mask. I changed myself depending on who I was around and who I thought I needed to be able to just fit in. I skipped school all of the time. My grades were horrible, which honestly really sucks because when I did try, I flourished, but I never really applied myself because I was so stuck in my own head. I never had those real steady friendships people talk about. I was just kind of a floater. I floated through life just performing whatever version of myself felt the safest in the moment. And before I even turned 18, I had multiple suicide attempts. I didn't really have the language at the time for how depressed I was. I just knew I would have rather been dead than be me. Even before substances had even entered the picture, I was already drowning. Now we're going to kind of get into ages like 13 to 16 years old. I started smoking around 13, smoking weed, and I started drinking around 14. And around 14 was when I got into my first extremely abusive relationship that I managed to hide for quite a bit of time, and that just, like, set off a spiral. I remember asking for help, no one really believed me, no one really listened to me, and I just, at some point ended up moving schools after that. And at 15, I started stealing bottles from grocery stores for older kids. I was sneaking out to trap houses. I was meeting up with dealers. I was always surrounded by a much older crowd, and that created a massive need to fit in. All in all, I just kind of played it off as like a rebellious teenage phase, and I thought that it was normal and I would eventually grow out of it. I kind of had figured at the time that every kid went through a phase like that. They don't. They don't. By 16, I was blacking out alone in my house, not only at parties, but also at home by myself, even if it was just to finish a paper. I remember I had like a 15-page paper due, and I drank like a bottle and a half of red wine by myself in my room. I got the paper done, I got an A. Probably not a good idea. Also, so as you guys know, I ride horses, but growing up in the horse world meant I was spending a lot of time away from home and I was staying at trainers' houses. I'd become like an extra member of the family. Remember, I used to sneak those like little canned rose bottles from my trainer's pantry and take them into my room and like hide them places. And when I would shower or if I like just be anywhere where the door was closed, I would just chug them down just to get a little bit of a buzz, and it didn't scare me the way it should have. Back then, it really just felt like a relief. Like, "Oh, this makes everything quiet." And I think struggling with mental health at such an early age, your brain never shuts up. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 16. I didn't realize yet, but that feeling of the, oh, this makes everything quiet was the beginning of addiction. I've been able to notice this now, but when I was younger, I got away with a lot. I was a pathological liar. I was extremely manipulative. And if I wanted to go and do something, I was probably going to find a way to do it. I am not proud of this, but it is a big part of my story. And I feel like it's important to say because I can stand back now and see how much growth I have done, but it was not always pretty. But I want to make it very clear these are all actions I made myself. I do not blame anyone for the road that I went down. My mom was literally my saving grace, and she did everything she could just to keep me floating, even though I was determined to drown. At 16, I found the college party scene and suddenly I felt like I finally belonged somewhere. Not to anyone's fault because I was really struggling to make friends. And when I finally found someone that I felt at home with, I had a lot of freedom to go and spend time with that person. But with that came a lot of other people I had no business being friends with, and a lot of people who unfortunately aren't alive today because of the lifestyle that we were living. And I am so incredibly grateful that I'm alive today to talk about what they couldn't. I love going out even with people who didn't even know my full name. Not because I love being around those people, but because partying and drinking finally made me feel like I fit in. I didn't feel anxious, I didn't feel insecure, and I definitely didn't feel like the girl who never knew who she was. I wasn't a young, naive girl anymore. A common pattern in my life was always trying to be older than I was because I thought I could finally become the mask I was wearing if I just grew up a couple years. I chased that version of myself. I grabbed onto it by the skin on my nails or whatever the saying is and held on for dear life. The loud, fun, seemingly confident girl, the one that boys liked but never loved because she was easier to live with than the real me. So now we're kind of getting into when I was 17, and this is where mental health really collided with everything else I had going on. After this incident was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and still to this day have bipolar disorder. It doesn't just go away. Which means even sober me, I can have manic episodes, manic blackouts. So with alcohol in the mix, it was a disaster from day one. This is a memory that I'm not proud of, as is a lot of these in this episode. But when I was 17, I stole over $12,000 from my family and I spent it all in a week. I don't remember anything that happened that weekend or those weeks. And then after I came out of that manic episode and I got caught, I tried to kill myself by crashing my car into a telephone pole. And if I'm being honest, I really think subconsciously I was bidding for sympathy because I knew my family would worry more about the accident than the money and the situation. It was, in general, a pretty dark time, but that was a level of instability that I was already living with, really extreme highs and really low lows, and substance only amplified it. I didn't get my bipolar diagnosis until like 3 to 6 months after this incident happened. This story is very important to my life because it shaped how I attach to people, how I manipulate, how I control people, and a big one, how I could never take accountability for my behavior. The constant need to hit the self destruct button. Self destruction was pretty much my middle name. Anytime a situation happened where I feel like what's the word I'm looking for? When I knew I was going to get in trouble and I didn't want to be in trouble, I would pull victim every single time, like on cue. That is something I've really had to work on, is to be able to own up to accountability and to like be okay with the consequences of my own actions. I think my mom was teetering on the level of like, I was so unstable. She was just trying to keep me alive. That led to me knowing that and unfortunately using that to my advantage. So, speaking about relationships, now we're going to dig a little deeper into them. I got into some really toxic relationships with people I should have never been around in the first place. I was so desperate to be loved. and terrified of being abandoned. So I attached myself to anyone who paid any attention to me and did whatever I needed to do to keep them. It was a pretty scary time. Like, you don't really know these people that you're attaching to. And I mean, they didn't really know me, to be fair. I changed myself to fit what they wanted, and I just manipulated and manhandled every situation. I was the greatest actor of our generation, and I was the best people pleaser you have ever seen on the face of the earth. I hid everything that I was struggling with because I just didn't want to be left. So I was with people that I never like clicked with because I just was like, they're my person, and trying to force until finally the mask cracked. It ended and my life was over. And then the pattern repeated with the next person. So this was like a pretty consistent cycle throughout my whole not my whole life, but a good portion of my life. I blamed everyone I was with, and I never once looked in the mirror and asked if I was the problem until finally one day I realized the problem was me. I was, in fact, the only common denominator of all of these atrocious relationships. I built relationships on fear and emptiness and not connection, not vulnerability, not love. And that became a huge part of how my addiction worked. So at 19, my horse trainers at the time decided that they wanted to move from California to Florida and asked me if I wanted to go with them. So I packed up my car and my dog and moved across the country, sight unseen, alone, into a one bed, one bath apartment by myself. And that is when everything escalated. I met a girl who just kind of grabbed me by the hand and took me with her. Next thing I know, I was out 6 nights a week. I was introduced to cocaine, which I swore I was never going to touch. And one day I just said, screw it, let's do it. At first, I had all these rules for myself when using, like I could never do it alone. I had to be drinking. I could never buy it myself. And that's how I thought I could outsmart my genetics. And if you guys know someone with bipolar disorder, when I met cocaine, it was like love at first sight. I was off to the races. Unfortunately, my rules went out the window very quickly and it just escalated rapidly. I completely reinvented myself into this loud, unbothered party persona who was everything internally that I wasn't. It was so much easier to pretend to be her instead of fixing who I was into someone I could actually sit with alone. But on the inside of this whole persona, I was just like falling apart at the seams. I couldn't even really look at myself in the mirror anymore. At 21, I got engaged during that time, and I kept the act going because I wanted to be loved so badly. I switched the role from party girl to like perfect housewife. I became the perfect girlfriend, the perfect fiance. Everything shifted, but not for me, for him. But eventually the mask fell, the relationship came to a close, not necessarily because of him or I. It was mainly because I was trying to force something with someone who was never meant for me in the first place. Shortly after, my life just like completely slipped out of my control, way beyond what I could have even pictured for myself. I like to call this one my Miami free fall, or my 3-week free fall, which actually was 4 weeks. I'm newly 21, I'm freshly unengaged, and I decided it'd be a great idea to do my first trip down to Miami alone. I spent 3 straight weekends partying on like full blown solo missions, no sleep, just parties, clubbing, day clubs, like whatever I could get my hands on. I did a lot of lying of who I was with to my family and what exactly I was down there doing. At one point, my mom actually called the cops on me because I went missing for a whole day, but I still stayed another night and proceeded to go out again. This is where I see a big difference between an addict and an alcoholic's way of thinking and someone who's not an addict and an alcoholic. I don't have that turn off switch. If you get sick from drinking, most people be like, "Oh, I'm not gonna drink tonight." I didn't have that. I'd get sick and I'd be out probably the same night of the morning that I was sick. Most people have the cops called on them for quite literally going missing, and they probably would have gone home. Nope, not me. I didn't have a place to stay, so I hit the clubs. I found a stranger and I asked them if I could stay at their house and was back out again until like probably 7 or 8 a.m. And then I went to a day club for the afternoon and then I drove home, I think, later at 4. I was so desperate to chase that feeling of that person that I was in that environment. It was literally a high on its own, and honestly, based on what happened down there, I probably shouldn't be alive. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. It was reckless. It was so incredibly dangerous, and I genuinely didn't care what happened to me. But looking back, it wasn't some fun partying and it wasn't living out my 20s to the fullest. It was pure self-destruction. And I think in between, so I did 3 weeks in Miami. I went to Europe for a weekend, and then I went back to Miami, but, on that Europe trip, I still was, like, horse shopping, and I remember meeting some Dutch people and, like, going out with them on King's Day, and I was out till 5 a.m., and I never went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, we drove 6 hours to Denmark to go sit on more horses. I don't know how I stayed alive for a lot of this. After the Miami trip, I did kind of chill out for a little bit. I think our show season started, and so I was really mainly at home for the beginning. Thought I was so much better than everyone else because I didn't go out. And I thought after Miami things got better, but in reality they didn't. They just got a lot quieter. And honestly, that was so much worse because when the noise stopped, I had nowhere to go, so I was stuck in my own little hellscape. I wasn't really out partying anymore. I was drinking alone. I was using Coke alone. I was going through like 8 or 9 bottles of wine a week easily. And at some point, the drinking alone turned into going out again. I would go to these girls' nights and I would end up blacking out there too. I'd always wake up the next morning just completely embarrassed and ashamed of like the things that I would do and I would say when I was drunk. And I would just do it all over again. Like I didn't learn anything. I thought that if I just kept numbing it and numbing it and numbing it, I'd forget about it. I was blacking out at my friends' events when they needed me to show up because being tipsy just wasn't enough. I remember my friend had this really big event, and I was like 3 bottles of wine deep, champagne deep before like the night had even started. Most of the time, I was just sleeping all day until it was acceptable to go back out to the bars. I also have found out that at this time, apparently, I was a very rude and mean person, and I was very hard to be around. And that is the complete opposite of what I thought I was at the time. And I mainly got those comments from when I was sober. When I was drunk, like everyone else was drunk too, so we'd all just be best friends together. But I was using a lot of people to get drugs. I was always on someone else's tab. And during that time, I would latch on to men who barely knew me, like obsessively attached. And I'd freak out on people even when I was sober. I had no sense on who I was. And honestly, I hated the person I was becoming, but I didn't know how to stop it. It no longer was fun or wild or whatever I used to tell myself to justify the things that I was doing. I wasn't just partying anymore. I was just disappearing quietly in my own little head. And that was truly a really scary part. There's also this one moment that I feel like it's really important for me to talk about in my addiction because it crossed a line that I swore I was never going to cross, and it happened at a horse show. Up until this point, my addiction and my usage never crossed over into my riding. That was my safe space, and this is the day that everything changed. I had this class coming up the next day, so this was on a Thursday evening. It was a class that I've been working toward all year, and I knew how important it was, not only to me, but to my team, to my mom, to my friends, to my family, like people in my horse riding circle. I knew I needed to be on my game. I needed to be rested, focused, all of it. But the night before, a group of my friends invited me out for what was just supposed to be one drink, just a little cocktail night. And in my head, I was like, okay, I can handle this. I'll be home early. I'll get some sleep and I'll wake up fresh. Except that is not at all how that went. That chill cocktail night turned into a full blackout. Heavy drinking, a lot of drug use, and just completely out of control. And when I tried to leave, when I was like, I need to go home because I got to be up early, I got to be up in like 4 hours, probably like 2 or 3 a.m. And I had to be on my horse at like 5:30. So when I tried to leave, my friend was like, "Come on, just stay. You're fine. Just stay for me. Just we'll get you more Coke and you can keep going." And it didn't take much, but I stayed. I decided I was like, "You know what? Screw it. Like I'll be fine. It won't be that bad." And I kept going. If I could go back, I don't know if I'd change it, but if I could go back, I wouldn't even gone out to begin with. Well, at that time I was an addict, so I probably would have. At 5:30 in the morning, and then I did something that still haunts me to this day. At 5:30 in the morning, I got on my horse completely blasted. I have never done anything like that my entire career. After that, I went home, I did some more Coke, I drank some more, I slept for a couple hours, and then I got dressed, I dragged myself back to the show like nothing happened. I competed, and obviously it went really bad. I was super sloppy. I was clearly off, and my horse didn't deserve that version of me, nor did my team or my mom. I just kind of let everyone down. I ended up getting caught. My trainer ripped into me pretty bad, and people knew. I got in big trouble, and that night I remember sitting at my mom's house that entire night, just like crying, promising her and promising myself that I would never do something like that again, and that I swore that I was gonna change, and if she just let me get away with it, I would stop. And then the next night, I was right back out again. No hesitation, no pause, no thought about what I'd put my horse through or my team or my close ones through, my loved ones, and no thought about the pain I'd caused my mom. I literally, like, I took fake accountability. There was no real accountability. It was just like numbness. And looking back, that moment was probably one of my biggest rock bottoms because it wasn't just me destroying my life anymore on my own free time. It had spilled into the one area that I swore that I was always going to protect, which was the horses. That was my safe space, my one constant, and I still managed to drag my addiction into that area. That was a moment that I realized how far gone I was. I couldn't even keep my addiction out of the one thing that I loved and I cherished and protected the most out of everything in my life. I mean, not only that, it was bleeding into like just like not showing up for work anymore or canceling on plans that I had made, not showing up for the people that needed me to show up. It just like slowly all started slipping away. Soon after the horse show incident, my grandma passed away. And because I was in pretty active addiction while my grandma was getting sick, I never went to see her because I never wanted to leave town because I was too busy drinking and partying and doing all this stuff. And so when my grandma died, it hit me hard and something in me just snapped. It was like whatever tiny thread I had been hanging on to for dear life just finally gave out. I went into a full on bender. I was drinking. I had manic episodes. I was having blackouts. It all just crashed into each other at the same time. And then I planned what I like to say was my last suicide attempt. And I was for real this time. That was kind of the moment where everything just like stopped. And I don't know what switched my thinking, but it hit me really hard that it was either I got help or I was going to die. and there was no longer a third option anymore. And it was like the feeling where I don't wanna die, but I don't wanna live anymore, and that really scared me because I did wanna live, but I didn't really wanna be alive. This was the first time in my life that I was actually really willing to ask for help. I was so desperate. I remember calling the suicide hotline. I did not know what else to do anymore. I was so disgusted with what I had become and who I was, and about 2 weeks later, I ended up being admitted into a mental hospital. I was in there for about 30 days, and those 30 days just, like, cracked me wide open. I started to see that my drinking wasn't just, like, bad decisions or partying too much. It was trauma, abandonment wounds, no sense of identity, self-hate, attachment issues, all of it just kinda stacked up on top of each other. Before I went in, I still wasn't convinced that I didn't have a drinking or a drugging problem. I thought I was just, like, mentally ill, incapable of handling my own problems. But for me, a big goal in my life is to eventually get married and start a family, and that would have never happened with who I was laying on the ground then and there. I knew the next step was to finally start to rebuild myself from the ground up, because the only person at the end of the day that I had to blame for everything that has transpired was myself. I knew after the first rehab that I was for sure done with drugs. For me, that part was honestly pretty easy, but I was still sitting in meetings at rehab telling myself, maybe I can drink in moderation someday. Maybe I don't have to give that up. And I wasn't fully ready to face it yet because I didn't think I had a problem with alcohol. Well, I got done with my first rehab, and towards the end, I kind of had an inkling that I didn't wanna drink anymore, so I told my therapist, like, "If I go home, I'm gonna relapse." So I got sent to another 30-day inpatient program. That rehab I went to was a ton of trauma work. EMDRs, we had to do a trauma egg about our entire life story and present it in front of a room full of people, and for some reason, it clicked that I realized, like, I never wanted to drink again. Not because I wanna be perfect or different or unique or inspirational, but I think after starting to work through and processing all of the trauma that I had been through, I actually wanted to live. For the first time, I wanted to not only show up for myself and stop abandoning me, but I wanted to fully show up for those that are around me and support them in whatever way I can to the best of my ability. And the only way I was going to be able to do that was if I got and stayed clean and sober. To be honest, sobriety is not easy. It's been one of the most difficult roads that I've ever walked down, but it is very real, and I'm trying to create a space that shows what getting sober is like. Honest, real, all the good, the bad, the ugly. Real is something I have never had for most of my life. And when I look at what sobriety has given me, it is so crazy how much different my life feels now. For the first time, I can confidently say I have a sense of who I am. I'm no longer acting or performing or pretending or manipulating to get people to like me. I'm allowing the people who don't see me to walk away, and I'm not fighting them on it. I am protecting myself, my peace, and who gets to be there with me. My emotional stability is something that I never imagined that was ever going to be in my future. My bipolar disorder now is finally manageable with the right medication and the right program, and the highs and lows don't just like wipe me out from the feet anymore. I regulate my own emotions. I can slow myself down. I can actually feel things without blowing up my entire world to feel something. And the relationships in my life, I don't know, they're real now. They're not trauma bonds or chaos with people who only liked me when I was drunk or when I was that loud, obnoxious version of myself. These are people who know me sober, choose me anyways, and love me through the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have I have self-respect. I don't wake up terrified of what I said or apologizing for my existence. I'm not waking up with the hundreds of calls I made to people who I haven't spoken to while I was drunk. I can sit in discomfort without self-destructing. I can cry and be happy without needing a drink. I can feel overwhelmed without spiraling, and I can be alone without panicking. And the most beautiful thing is like I'm able to take accountability and apologize when I'm wrong. I'm no longer blaming others for how I react or the actions that I myself am taking. I am no longer the victim of my story. And for the first time, I'm not punishing my body or my brain. I'm actually taking care of myself, finding hobbies and doing things that I enjoy, which is shocking to say out loud based on how I was living before. I could barely even get up the energy to go and shower and brush my teeth. And now, like, I have a whole self care routine. Even the barn is feeling different. I am so much more present in my riding and I'm more present with my horse. I am not numb or hungover or disassociating. I am finally enjoying it again. I found my love and my passion for the horses once more. I'm excited to be around the people who really see a different side of me. My career is finally blossoming and I can think about the future now. I can picture next week, next month, next year. I can see the life that I want and actually know how to take the steps to move toward it. I don't hate myself anymore. I'm not perfect, but I'm a lot more honest and I am a work in progress, as we all are. Sobriety has not only allowed me to be patient with myself, but also really learn how to wholeheartedly forgive myself because what I did doesn't define me, but how I grow from that does. One of the biggest pieces of this whole process was finding God. I couldn't have done any of this without him. I think working a 12-step program didn't just give me my life back. It gave me a relationship with God that I've never been able to have before. An actual real one where I feel like I'm not pretending just so I make other people feel more comfortable. One where now I have fully turned my life and my will over to him in a way I had never been willing to do so before. I also just didn't know how. And there were so many moments in this journey where it wasn't my own strength that got me through it. It was that surrender. It was the finally letting go of something bigger than me and allowing him to take the wheel because I had proven over and over and over again that my way just like was not cutting it. It's not going to work. My willpower is not strong enough. And I know without a doubt that without the 12-step program and without God, I would not be sitting here right now telling the story and I probably wouldn't have been alive to tell it. Sobriety didn't give me a perfect life, but it's given me the steps to not only find my purpose, but build the life that God has intended for me. And it gave me that relationship with God that quite literally changed the trajectory of everything. So, yeah, that's my story. At least like a very cut and dry, rough draft version of it. And at some point, I'll probably dive deeper into bits and pieces throughout my string of addiction. And if any of this feels familiar, I just want you to know that you are not alone, you're not broken, and you're not too far gone. No matter what your brain tries to tell you, don't listen to it. And whether you're sober curious, and honestly just trying to figure out your life, I am so glad that you're here. This space was literally made for you. There is so much more coming, more episodes, more conversations, and more honesty. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being a part of this. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.